Hi guys, so welcome to my first episode of Politics in PJs, where I try and teach myself, and maybe along the way you, some politics. It's cleverly named because I'm in my pyjamas. Alrighty guys, so in today's episode we're going to go over a few key concepts of pressure groups. We're going to define pressure groups, we're going to define single issue pressure groups, the difference between pressure groups and social movements we're going to cover, the classification of pressure groups, roles of pressure groups, and the difference between inside and outside pressure groups. So, first off, a pressure group is defined as a group of like-minded individuals who come together on the basis of shared interest or commonly held cause in order to put pressure on policymakers, policymakers being the legislative. A single issue group is defined as a pressure group that focuses on a single issue as opposed to a range of issues with a key theme. Single issue groups often disband as soon as their main objective is achieved, kind of like how UKIP have faded into irrelevance now that we're leaving the EU. An important clarification to make early on is the difference between a pressure group and a social movement. Pressure groups are organised. They have a membership structure, a leader or leaders, often a permanent physical office and an online presence that's official and not just a bunch of people on Twitter. Social movements generally bring people together from across the board as well, including uniting different pressure groups and political parties. For example, in the UK we have the Green Movement, which is pressure groups like Greenpeace, the Soil Association, Plain Stupid, but also that covers political parties like the Greens. The types of pressure groups can kind of be divided into two broad categories. Type 1 is the sectional groups. Sectional groups are sometimes referred to as protectionist groups or private interest groups. They're looking to advance the shared interest of the membership rather than a broader cause. So sectional groups are almost always exclusive, where members need to meet a certain entry requirement. A great example for this is the British Medical Association, who only accept people as members who are trained to be or are qualified as members of the medical profession. The second kind of pressure group is called a cause group. A cause group is also called a promotional group or public interest group. They are looking to promote interests that are not of direct benefit to the membership. Causes tend to be massively inclusive. They're looking for the biggest membership base that they can generate. As an example of a cause group, the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, the RSPB, has well in excess of 1 million members, and at one point has had more registered members than the Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrat Party combined, so they're pretty powerful. Cause groups can be further divided into three categories. You have attitude cause groups, seeking to change people's attitudes on a particular issue, so Greenpeace are a really good example of that, focused on the environment. 2, political cause groups, a cause group focused on a political issue, so that could be unlocked democracy or anyone seeking to change particularly the way the political system is balanced. And the third is a sectional cause group, a group that represents a specific section of society that isn't reflected by the membership, so this is where they kind of overcross. An example of this is the NSPCC. It's a group that campaigns for children but is not set up and run by children, so that is a sectional cause group. In summary, sectional groups serve the interests of their members, are exclusive in membership and have conditions for entry, and cause groups campaign on policies they believe will benefit others or wider society and seek wider membership bases. There are 3 roles of pressure groups in the UK. The first is participation. Pressure groups allow citizens to participate in the political process between terms of election. Our MPs are technically representatives and not delegates, so when we vote for them and they win, they go off to Parliament and they can basically make their own decisions on behalf of us. But a pressure group is a way to kind of influence something that is going on in Parliament. A democratic society will demand that there is a channel of communication between the people and the government. Pressure groups keep that direct channel open all year round. The second function of a pressure group in the UK is representation. Pressure groups enhance the representation of a group of individuals by highlighting the key issue and presenting it to Parliament in a more kind of concentrated way. Political parties are often accused of having catch-all policies. You'll see this in the run-up to general elections. The manifesto will have kind of 4 or 5 different policies that will just appeal to everyone. They're trying to reach the widest base possible, as you know, they're bound to. They're trying to be elected as a majority government. Single issue groups specifically force representation onto Parliament of people who are really focused on one particular issue. They have to be represented in Parliament. The pressure is now there. An example of this as a pressure group is Action on Smoking and Health, abbreviated to ASH. They're a registered charity in the UK who were influential in lobbying for and implementing the English smoking ban. Smoking. The English smoking ban, where it's now illegal for anyone to smoke inside a public building or in a public space that's not in a designated smoking area. So that's a great example of where a pressure group has been really effective on a single issue. The third function of a pressure group in the UK is education. Insider pressure groups are consulted by the government pretty much daily in the policy making process, and this benefits the government as well because pressure groups make sure that the government isn't introducing legislation that's going to cause conflict or controversy, because no government wants to be taken into account and, you know, having this resource available to them, these pressure groups, and then the general public get to turn around and say, you had these people telling you this was wrong but you did it anyway. So in that way, pressure groups also help the government be held to account, which is super useful. A few times now I've mentioned inside and outside pressure groups. Now the difference between these two is simple. Inside pressure groups are functioning within government. They've won the trust of the government of the day, they are consulted in the policy making process, some of them even have offices inside Westminster. They have actual influence on the core executive. They tend to have more mainstream goals and don't engage in public action. If they've won the trust of the government of the day, they're not going to then try and embarrass them because they'll lose their influence in government. Outside pressure groups take more public action and they don't communicate with the executive basically at all. Some pressure groups like Greenpeace actively distance themselves from the establishment, and they show this by, you know, repeated illegal acts. They break into labs, they burn research, they disrupt daily government business, and sort of get in the way any way they can as a form of protest. So in that way, it's pretty easy to pick out which associations want to be actively against government, whereas other groups like Amnesty International have to be seen not to be working with government too closely, as they're a very reputable pressure group for being neutral and being impartial, especially in matters that include multiple countries and international relations. Outside groups often represent more controversial issues as well, and they take part in publicity stunts like marches or this dates back all the way to the suffragettes chaining themselves to gates and Emily Davidson on the horse track trying to disrupt the King's horse. Any kind of issue that's seen as controversial and won't get near government for that issue, public demonstration. So insider groups can be broken down into 3 key groups. There's the core, the specialist, and the peripheral. Core insider groups have particularly strong links to government and influence on policy making, and that'll be groups such as the BMA, which I mentioned earlier, the Medical Association. Specialist insiders are consulted on a smaller range of issues. They're literally specialist consultants. They have a good knowledge on what they know, and that is just those slim number of issues. And then that goes down even further to peripheral insiders, whose areas of expertise are so niche that the government will only consult them very rarely on very, very specific issues. Outsider groups can also be broken into 3 groups. There's potential insiders, outsiders by necessity, and ideological outsiders. Potential insiders are groups that, like in the name, might one day become insiders, but are currently lacking in support or experience. If a pressure group doesn't have a wide enough base of support or hasn't been around long enough, the government will view them as lacking legitimacy, So they probably won't take them as seriously, and therefore they are potential insiders, maybe in a couple of years' time. Outsiders by necessity are groups that are forced to operate outside of government. This is either because the group's aims are unrealistic or because of their methods. So groups that function with highly illegal activity, such as breaking into labs, as I mentioned earlier, or publicity stunts, probably won't be allowed near government because they don't want that reputation. So the government will keep them at arm's length, therefore outsiders by necessity. And the third group that they come into is ideological outsiders. I mentioned earlier that Amnesty International can't be seen to collude with governments because they're impartial. That comes under ideological outsiders because their base foundation means they're incompatible. As a note, classifying pressure groups as insider-outsider can have its issues, usually because they can change so quickly with ingoing or outgoing administrations. A pressure group that's very popular with the Conservative government, they lose the election, will not be popular with the Labour government, chances are. A term that might appear in the exam is captive or prisoner groups. These are pressure groups that are dependent on the government, either because they're funded by the government in partial degree or in full, or because the government had a hand in their creation. The Equality and Human Rights Commission came out of the 2006 equalities legislation, so the government created it. It can't separate itself from that. The next section we're going to cover is traditional pressure group methods. These include things like letter writing campaigns, petitions, public assembly, conventional lobbying. The examples given by this textbook, which is the one I'm going off of, I probably should have mentioned that, give the anti-abortion organisation Life's campaign of more than 2 million names on a petition and 2 postcard campaigns in opposition to the bill which became the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act of 1990. In February 2003, an estimated 1 million people took to the streets as part of the Stop the War Coalition's efforts to stop deployment of troops in Iraq. So you can see these pressure groups have major influence outside of government. A method that is often referenced is called lobbying. Lobbying is simply, writing to or talking face to face with members of the government, with MPs, with anybody who has any kind of importance to do with the issue. In recent years, it's actually become a professional business where people can hire professional lobbyists to put pressure in the right places. This can include kind of social sanctions or business sanctions. If someone has a particularly influential contract that they can award to one company or another, and the ethics of one company is being applied by a pressure group, you can see how that might cause some kind of change that otherwise would not have come around without the influence of the pressure group. A less common pressure tactic is litigation. This is where a pressure group will pursue legal action, typically with one of 4 aims. So the first is the group may be trying to prove that the government has acted beyond its authority. If they can take it to the UK Supreme Court and say, the government actually doesn't have jurisdiction here, this legislation isn't right, then it gets thrown out, legislation's overturned. The second is when it's taken to an EU court. Legislation or rules in place might not violate UK law, but they could be in violation of EU legislation, so that's another way to get it overturned and thrown out, or put more safeguarding in, depending on what the issue is. The third is to try and prove a violation of the Human Rights Act of 1998 brought in by the Blair administration. This has a very wide reach as a piece of legislation, so it's not uncommon to try and find something in there that means whatever's happening needs to not happen, or there needs to be something put in place. The fourth aim of litigation is simply to raise awareness rather than get the result that they want. If you take a lawsuit to a court, it generates media presence, especially if you're suing the government or some branch of. There's always going to be media attention on that, and then that generates attention to the issue. So regardless of whether or not the lawsuit, which is probably doomed from the start, is a success, there is now more media presence, which encourages the new membership, which spreads awareness of the message and generates more power and legitimacy for the group. Direct action is another popular form of pressure group action and is increasingly important now within social movements. Direct action may include civil disobedience or illegal acts, possibly resulting in violence on behalf of protesters, state, or both. Direct action often summons the most media attention and is therefore popular with the outsider groups. Again, the insider groups aren't looking to embarrass the government by causing any stir. Civil disobedience is a key term and is a form of non-violent protest. An excellent example is the campaign against poll tax. When Thatcher tried to put in the tax, thousands of people just refused to register for it. They didn't go to the council, say, here are my details, I'm here to pay this tax. And then when they were given a court summons because they'd failed to register, they just didn't turn up. No violence, civil disobedience. So here's a summary of what you need to know about pressure groups. Pressure groups are groups of people with a common goal or interest coming together to make it happen. Recent years have seen the decline in traditionally organised pressure groups and the rise of social movements. Pressure groups perform three main functions. They allow participation, they allow better representation in Parliament, and educate the general public on their focus issues. The right to engage in pressure group activity is fundamental in democratic society. Freedom of speech, freedom of association, the right to assembly, and freedom to petition are protected characteristics in any democracy. Pressure groups can be classified by their core aims, as sectional or cause groups, or by relation to their government, so insider or outsider. Pressure groups can advance their agendas by traditional tactics, such as letter writing and public demonstrations, and newer tactics such as the use of litigation, social media attention and presence. Finally, a pressure group's chances of success are shaped by the size of their membership, their support, the public attitude towards the issue and their cause, their methods, and their resources available. It's worth noting, for that reason actually, that pressure groups can sometimes be seen as an elitist institution, because obviously if you have a membership that is richer and has a better position in society, it's going to push the cause further because there are more resources available. So, that's it for that one. If you have any questions about pressure groups that I can try and answer, drop them in the comments section. See you soon.